Some of you are too young to remember this, but some of you might remember this was an ad campaign. Can you identify this? You remember this? I blurred out the logo. Does anyone remember the company? Apple. It's Apple Computer. And little thing about the story of this campaign goes back to 1997. Apple is struggling. This is just after Steve Jobs has been sort of in exile. He's just come back, but the CEO is a guy named Gil Amelio, and they're trying to figure out how to rebrand the company. And so they hired a company, BBO, or BBDO, a marketing firm, to come up with a slogan. And the slogan that BBDO came up with was, "We're back." And everybody loved it, including the CEO. Except for one guy, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs hated it. He said, that slogan, these are his words. He's not a guy who made a lot of friends, I think. He said, that slogan is stupid because Apple isn't back yet. So this led to a debate and led then to Jobs asking other PR firms to come up with other slogans and ad campaigns. And one of them, Chia Day, came up with this one that we know today, think different. There was debate about the grammar. English teachers, you know it should say differently, right? But Steve Jobs thought it was the shorter way was better, and it worked. This became an iconic ad campaign. In fact, Apple used it for 7 years, and it showed that they wanted to be a company for people who didn't follow the world script, who opened their minds, right? But there's an irony here, an irony about this slogan and other kind of sayings like it, and that's why we bring it up today. So, think different was about branding. It was a tagline created by a huge company, and so the message about thinking freely is being delivered to you by a multinational company that wants you to buy their stuff. So when you buy into the idea of thinking different, what's actually happening is you are just doing what a computer company is telling you to do. And this is what so many people do in life without ever recognizing it, without ever seeing this irony. Like, we love the phrase and we use the phrase, think for yourself. But wait a minute. When you trace it back, you heard that from somebody else. You learned that from somebody, some voice, some influence. So even the idea of thinking for yourself is something that you received and took in and learned from somebody else. And this points to something that we all hate. We hate to acknowledge this, we hate to admit it, and that is that we are all, whether we like it or not, whether we admit it or not, we are shaped by, we are influenced by other people. Ideas do not spontaneously pop into our minds. They come from somewhere. They come from other people that we're listening to. We pick up these messages and these ideas and this sort of focus and orientation of our life from our families, from our schools, from our communities, from the media, from music that we listen to. We're shaped by these things, and we don't want to admit it. We don't like to admit it. In fact, we want to be the kind of people who don't do what anybody, who kind of just do our own thing. We want to be our own man, our own woman. And in fact, we hate the alternative so much that we have come up with a term of disdain for those people who just do what they're told, who just follow the crowd, right? We call them sheeple. They're not people, they're more like sheep. They just follow, unlike us, who think different, who think for ourselves. But again, that's not how it works, because even that idea of thinking for ourselves is something we learned from someone else. Even the idea of going our own way is something that we're doing by following the advice and dictates of somebody else. We are all sheeple, whether we like it or not. We are all learning, receiving, being influenced. The only question is, by whom? Who are we listening to? Who are we looking to allow our influence? We all have shepherds. We have leaders who influence how we think and how we live. And some are good. Some are good shepherds. Some are wise. Some are helpful. And some are not, right? This is true in our social lives. It's true in our economic lives. It's true in our political lives. And of course, it's true in our spiritual lives. And even people who want to be and claim to be spiritual but not religious because they don't want to follow any structure, they're still following some structure. They're following somebody's ideas about spiritual things, some authority. And the question is, who? So in our passage today, Jesus talks about being a good shepherd. And if you've been around church, you probably just associate this idea of the shepherd and being sheep following a shepherd. We just associate it specifically, maybe even exclusively, with church life. But in the ancient world, they didn't. They thought of this broadly. In fact, political leaders adopted the language and talked of themselves as shepherds. In the ancient world, Hammurabi, the famous Babylonian king, was known as the shepherd of the people. Assyrian kings called themselves righteous shepherds. And even some Sumerian kings are pictured wearing shepherd's garb. So this idea was an image of protection and provision and leadership, and so it was applied in all kinds of ways, which in some ways is probably helpful for us because we're taking all these ideas and influence from all kind of sources. Jesus chooses this title to identify not just as a shepherd, but to identify as the shepherd. And he was acknowledging that people will always have leaders in all these different spheres of life, and we really need good ones, and he claims to be the kind of shepherd that we all need. And so that's what this sermon is titled, the kind of spiritual leader that we need, and that applies to Jesus, of course, first. But we also have other people who are, like in the church, we have pastors. And by the way, the word pastor comes from the Greek word shepherd. So that's what pastors are. That's our role, is to be, and we would call ourselves under shepherds, kind of pointing people to the ultimate, to the good shepherd, but we still have that role. And as I've been saying here, so do all kinds of other people have that role in people's lives. Influencers, self-help gurus, celebrities, political figures. We learn about life, we get direction from shepherds, and are we getting it from good ones? That's the $100,000 question. Are we following, are we listening to shepherds who know what they're talking about? Are we learning from people who will really help us grow, who will lead us to a life of true joy and peace and life? Because the quality of our life, the experience of joy we have, the sense of peace that we're living with, the experience of freedom that we have, that all depends on who we have placed in that role of shepherd in our lives. So John 10 shows what sets a good shepherd apart, and we're going to talk about that. And so in your bulletin, there's notes there. We're going to talk about three things. And as I'm going through this, ask yourself this question: who am I listening to? Who am I letting shape my life? And is that voice, are those people, is that life-giving? Or is that pulling me away from life? And so the first point is actually the title of the sermon, but it's also the first point of the sermon, which is that Jesus is the kind of spiritual leader that we need. And so when he describes this, what a shepherd does, what a good shepherd does, he paints a picture of a shepherd. And what I'd like to do is just sort of walk through these verses, and I'm going to give you 6 characteristics that Jesus, or 6 things that Jesus talks about that describe what a good shepherd is. And so, of course, we're thinking about that as Jesus as our good shepherd, but then also think about this in terms of who are the other people, the human shepherds that we're listening to and learning from. And so first, the good shepherd enters by the gate. They're not sneaking in. Verse 1, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. So what he's saying is that some people come into that role of leadership, come into that role of shepherding illegitimately, in a dishonorable way. They don't sort of follow the path that they should be following. For example, the spiritual leaders in Jesus' day, many of them, they got their role not by their gifts or their calling, but they got it through connections and through political maneuvering. And so Jesus says a true shepherd enters through the front. The door opens for him. The doorkeeper knows him and lets him in because he's earned trust. He's not sneaking in some other way, all right? The second thing is a good shepherd is recognized by the doorkeeper. The one enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, that's verse 3, and the sheep listen to his voice. So here's the background. In villages, there would be a communal sheep pen, and the shepherds and flocks coming through would, at night, put their sheep in this pen. So there'd be sheep from different flocks in this pen. And so then there would be a gatekeeper whose job it was to keep that sorted out and to guard that. And then he would recognize who the shepherds were that he could let in, right? And so the issue is, are the leaders, again, it gets back to trust. Are leaders trusted people, trusted by the gatekeeper? And gatekeepers would be the people who are in charge of giving people positions of leadership. And ultimately, the gatekeeper would be God, entrusting people into positions of leadership. Okay, the third, the sheep listen to the shepherd's voice. That's the characteristic of good shepherds, is that they have earned the trust of the sheep. Verse 3 says, he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They'll never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. So the sheep follow a good shepherd because they know his voice. They trust it. A couple of stories about this. Commentator C.H. Dodds tells this story. This apparently happened some years ago. A traveler from Scotland wanted to sort of try this trick. So he was in Israel, not far from Jerusalem, and he was hanging out with the shepherd. And so he and the shepherd exchanged clothing. And in fact, he even also had the turban on, so you could not tell it was not the real shepherd. And then he tried to get the sheep to follow him, and he called out to them. They wouldn't go. But the shepherd, the real shepherd, who was dressed, who looked differently, called out, and the sheep went to him. Because they trusted not the appearance, they trusted the voice. Another true story, this goes back to World War I. Again, in Israel, near Jerusalem, a group of soldiers, I'm not sure what army they were with, but a group of soldiers captured a bunch of sheep. I'm not sure what they were going to do with them, but if they were going to, shear them or maybe eat them, I don't know. But they got this flock of sheep, and there was a shepherd, but he, of course, had no ability to fight them off. And once the sheep were gone, he had no ability to go back and fight for them to get them back. But what he did was he simply called out in his shepherd's voice, and the sheep left those other soldiers. The soldiers could not keep the sheep away from the shepherd because they knew his voice. They listened to, they trusted. So that's a good shepherd, sheep will listen to him. Number 4, a shepherd leads the sheep by going before them. Verse 4, when he's brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them and the sheep follow him. It's not like the cattle drives, in the Wild West where they would, push the sheep herd them in that way, the shepherd would just go on ahead and the sheep would then follow. And so a leader is someone who models, someone who leads by invitation, because they go first, they take the risk, they see the terrain, and then the sheep follow with that. Number 5, a shepherd protects the sheep, or a good shepherd protects the sheep. Jesus says, I'm the gate, I'm the door, I'm the access point. And in fact, what would happen is a good shepherd would, let's say at night, lead sheep into some enclosed area for their protection, and then the shepherd would lay across that opening so that other wild animals couldn't get in. He was the protection for the sheep. And so they literally did that, what Jesus is talking about. And he says that is his role, to protect the sheep. And that's what all good shepherds do. And finally, this is getting into then a little bit of foreshadowing, but Jesus also says that a good shepherd sacrifices for the sheep. Verse 11, I'm the good shepherd. A good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, as opposed to the hired hand who does not own the sheep. When he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. When the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it, the man runs away because he's a hired hand. But Jesus is the good shepherd, and he lays his life down for his sheep. And of course, this foreshadows Christ's coming death. In fact, this saying was delivered weeks or months before he was crucified. So he's looking ahead to his death on the cross. And so anyway, these 6 characteristics, this forms a picture of a good shepherd. And Jesus is that good shepherd. And so ask yourself, when you think about the people in your life that you're listening to, do they seem like a good shepherd? Are they gatekeeping with integrity? Are they known by their accountability? Do they lead with humility? Do they lead with courage? That's the kind of leader that Jesus is. That's the kind of leader that Jesus calls leaders in church to be, and that's the kind of leader that we need. Okay, we're going to move forward, and then the next thing, I want to highlight this, verse 10. Jesus offers abundant life to those who follow him. So in the midst of talking about him being the shepherd and the kind of shepherd that he is, in verse 10, he makes this very strong claim. The thief comes in only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they might have life and have it to the full, or have it abundantly. And that word that the NIV translates to the full, or some translators say abundantly, it literally means overflow, surplus, to have so much life, so much joy. So Jesus isn't promising necessarily a longer life, but a more full life, a whole life, a life of contentment, joy, peace, purpose. And it's such a contrast to what so many people are experiencing today. When we look around us, what do we see? We see stress and anxiety and relationship strain and purposelessness. Even lives that look good on paper, there's oftentimes such a deep dissatisfaction and unhappiness underneath. And no matter, we chase happiness through all these things, through material success, through control so that we stay safe, or personal ease and comfort. And whatever we have, it's never enough. We always want more money, more approval, more comfort. Jesus offers something very different. Not more stuff, but more life. And theologians like Donald Blesh and others point out that the abundant life Jesus is talking about is not simply about heaven when we die, but it's also a present reality as well. We experience a new quality of life here and now, even as we wait for the life to come. And we see this. The data shows this. Pew Research shows that people who are active in religious communities tend to be significantly happier, 10 percentage points happier than people who are unaffiliated. Gallup poll shows the same trend. People who attend worship services weekly report higher life satisfaction rates. Global studies show that being spiritually connected correlates with greater meaning, social cohesion, and deeper joy. Now, the stats don't prove that being a Christian, means that you won't ever struggle, but it's what they're saying is, and what they're showing is, if our faith is real and we're living it out, life just works better. Jesus' words in John 10 frame this. He invites us to a life that's full. And so I invite you sometime, just don't do it now, but Google it sometime, just the research on life satisfaction for consistent church going or for active Christian living. There's a strong correlation, and we're seeing it. Jesus talks about this. He promises this. He doesn't necessarily promise a life of comfort and ease. In fact, he does say that in this world, in John 10 or John 16, he says, in this world, you will have trouble. Doesn't deny that, but says that the promise is that even within that struggle and challenges, he will provide guidance and help as we go through. And the issue, though, for those of us as Christians is, are we following what our Good Shepherd is leading us to? So the theologian Thomas Aquinas put it this way some years ago. He said, "Great is the blindness of many souls. They seek God, they long for God, and he lives inside them, yet they ignore him." So the problem isn't that God is not there. It's just that in the busyness and noise of life, we tend to crowd him out. And so abundant life starts with recognizing the presence and power of God in our lives and following that lead and recognizing that God is at work. So that's the kind of confidence that changes our lives. Well, let's move on. Jesus offers this abundant life. The third insight here is that Jesus is gathering a global flock and uniting a global flock. And we see that in verse 16. He goes on and he's talking about that he's going to be giving his life for the sheep. He lays it down. But notice, if you have your Bible there, verse 16, he says, "I have other sheep that are not in this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice. There will be one flock and one shepherd." What he means is that there's other people far beyond this fold that are going to hear his voice, and he's going to gather them too. And you got to know, this was radical for him to be talking like this. Jewish people, especially in Jesus' time, had a lot of energy about their identity as opposed to everybody else. It was the Jews and everybody else. The Gentiles were outsiders. They were the other. They were different, and they were dangerous. But Jesus saw beyond this. And, you think about our world today. This we are so divided. I mean, we do this. We draw lines over race, politics, religion, culture. In some ways, we are more fragmented today than ever. But Jesus envisions one flock, one shepherd, unity beyond whatever political or social or ethnic tribe that might divide us. Some years ago, I toured in a band in East Asia, went through China, Korea, Hong Kong, and Japan. And I had not traveled outside the West before. I wasn't sure about how the language and the culture might make things hard. But what I found is that our common faith, and especially when we would worship together, within that, our differences just melted away. All these differences about our background, our language, our experiences of the world, it was obvious how much we had in common as fellow believers. That's what Jesus envisioned. Over the years, I've now had opportunities to teach classes with a mission organization called YWAM. And most of the classes, I teach in other parts of the world, and wherever I do, there's all kinds of people from different countries, and it's like the highlight of my teaching there. I hope by the end of the week that they've learned something from me about addiction and recovery, but I know I've learned a lot from them about what it means to be a follower of Christ, because I see how they're living it out in different backgrounds and cultures and wrestling with different questions, and I learn, and their faith wakes up something in me that I didn't know I had. And that's what Jesus is describing here, the beauty of, the power of a global flock. Not just people who think like us, who look like us, but people from all corners of the world who've heard the shepherd's voice. And so that means when we gather for worship, we're part of something much bigger than this, much greater than this. We're part of a body that spans cultures, that spans continents, that spans centuries. And so it also means that when we try to shrink down our perspective about faith to fit only our culture, only our denomination, only our country, only our ethnic group, that we are working against the vision of Jesus. His aim, he specifically says it there. Do you see that in verse 16? His aim is not to create a bunch of sheep pens, but to bring the sheep together in one pen, under one shepherd. So are we living like that? People who are part of that kind of flock? Or are we still putting up fences, dividing people into us and them, narrowing the circle of who belongs? The book, that's the future, by the way. You know that, right? That's the future. The book of Revelation gives us a picture of that future. People from every tribe, every tongue, every nation, all standing together and worshiping God. And we are a part of that vision when we gather together with people from other places and gather and worship together. Okay, so we've talked about three truths from John 10. That Jesus is the kind of shepherd that we need, who enters, who cares deeply, who protects us sacrificially. He offers us abundant life, not just as a future possible promise, but as a reality in our life today. He gathers a global flock, one family under one shepherd. These are invitations to all of us. So where are you today? Do you feel spiritually orphaned, untethered, wary of religious voices maybe? Or maybe you feel restless, seeking joy, peace, and purpose, but experiencing just a lot of emptiness. His abundance is real and it lasts. Or maybe are you pulling back or resisting difference, just sticking with people that you know and like because they're safe? And Jesus says, I have sheep from other sheep pens and I want to bring them together. So his love includes our tribe, but their tribes too. So today, let's listen to his voice and let him shepherd us.